with the authors, Dr. Briker and Fabiola Gerpott from the article Publishing Registered Reports in Management and Applied Psychology, Common Beliefs and Best Practices, published in the October 2024 issue of the Organizational Research Methods Journal. Roman and Fabiola, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, so for our interview today, we will talk about the background story of the paper and such as the author motivation and review process, as well as their further thoughts on taking this research forward. So to start us off, can you give us a brief highlight of your article and how this article can help scholars in their research?
Yes, Jay, of course. Thank you. Thanks again for organizing this. So our article deals with the topic of registered reports. Registered reports are when you write a paper a bit different than we usually do. Normally you have an idea, you have hypotheses, you design a study, collect the data, analyze the data, you write it up and you send it to a journal. That comes with a lot of challenges, studies that can't be replicated, researchers that play around with the data, do so-called questionable research practices, p-hacking, harking, to try a specific story because journals often want clean results. The registered report format flips that around. You have an idea, you look at the theory, you review the literature, and then you propose how you would collect data and how you would analyze. And at that point in time, you submit the paper to a journal to get review before you collect the data. And that format has a lot of advantages. It produces higher quality work, more applicable, higher power, judged as more innovative and higher quality on different criteria. But we don't see that format is happening a lot. So Fabiola and I teamed up and decided to provide researchers with the tools to maybe debunk what people think of registered reports, that they are not as interesting, that they won't be cited, that they're only useful for experiments and so forth. And then also with the hands-on tools of how to actually implement that. How do I prepare my methods, or what kind of research questions should I study? This is what our paper was about, and we asked different stakeholders, from people who have done registered reports to editors and reviewers who have dealt with registered reports, to lay audience of what they think registered reports should look like, what common pitfalls or beliefs, myths are true or not, and what they should do to write them in a good, to write registered reports in an effective way. Fabiola, I'm handing over to you. Anything we should add?
Thanks. I think this is a very good summary of kind of these two goals that we first, by asking these different stakeholders group, we not only did this survey-based research, but because we also asked people who already had written a registered report, that means we also identified 50 registered reports that have been published in the field of applied psychology and management. And in addition to like these two things, that we show the common beliefs and that we also show best practices, I think the third thing that our paper offers is basically just an overview of 50 registered reports that you can go to and just look at, okay, how did they do it? And see it really in real life, how you could maybe do it yourself as well.
Yes, thank you both for sharing kind of like the overview and highlights of the paper, and for actually making the effort to bring registered report and presentation open science closer to the audience and scholar in the field of management and applied psychology. And it looks like from your overview that your motivation of this paper is that because you see that it's become more common in the field of management psychology, but also the scholars still are not familiar with the process. So is this coming from, your own experience of doing the register report yourself, or from hearing from your colleagues and their challenges and struggles? And can you elaborate more on the motivation of this paper? Why did you started it?
That's a very Good question, because I can definitely say it's both. So first, I got the experience myself from actually trying to do a registered report, that there's a lot of issues that I would have liked to know beforehand, and then I learned it the hard way by actually having to go through the whole emotional journey and improving it. So that was my own experience. But then also on the other side, I am serving as an editor for the Leadership Quarterly, and there we get a lot of registered report submissions, but they are not yet at that quality that we would maybe hope for. So also from this very practical editor perspective, we saw that there is room for improvement. And then assessing, maybe there's a little bit of confusion going around with these terms, because you also, you kindly mentioned pre-registration as well. And often this is mixed up, that people think pre-registration is the same as a registered report, or they mix it. They say something like pre-registered report, which actually doesn't exist. Pre-registration is something where you obviously kind of do the same as for a registered report, namely you pre-register your hypothesis somewhere, for example, online on the Open Science Framework. It gets a timestamp. Others can then later look at it and see whether you really did what you promised. But for pre-registration, there is no journal involved. There is just like you doing this. Whereas for the registered report, by definition, if you do it, it has to do with a journal that offers a normal review process, just at a different point in time. And that is kind of, besides the own experience as an editor and as an author, the third thing that matters, that also if you go around and give seminars, and I know that Roman does this a lot and can probably say more about his experience there, that you see that people have struggles around the terms.
Yeah, absolutely. I can echo that. And maybe briefly to add is that in the field you kind of see an interesting mismatch. On the one hand, there's this research clearly showing that registered reports have a lot of benefits, right? That some of them I mentioned, higher quality, more innovative. People who don't know whether they're reading a registered report or not rate the registered report better, basically in all criteria. If you talk to many people, say, oh, I would like to do a registered report. They're so nice. They're so cool. But you don't see a lot of them. We had one Redditor telling us that they are trying to get registered reports, but nobody's submitting them. We had another case where a special issue in an FT50 journal was retracted because they didn't get any submissions. So if it has a lot of benefits, nobody's doing it. What's going on? And I think part of that, the answer is what Fabiola just alluded to in my experience as well. If I give these presentations, you have a lot of PhDs and postdocs and mostly younger people who are saying, oh, I want to do this. Next paper is a registered report. And then you have maybe the older full professors who have done research, not everybody, but many of them a different way, maybe, explorative, maybe even p-hacking or hacking, who say, no, we don't want this. It's dangerous. You can do register reports. When you're older, it works only for experiments. Nobody will read or cite this. And we thought, so we need to tackle this mismatch, and we need to provide empirical answers to, are these beliefs or myths actually true? Is it really that registered reports are cited less? Nobody reads them. They're only for experiments. They're only done by more experienced researchers. And in most cases, disclaimer, this is not true.
Yes, thank you for sharing kind of like the motivation, and thank you, Fabiola, for explaining the differences between register report and pre-registration. And obviously, as a young scholar as I had the mistake, and hopefully that through this video, our audience and through your article as well, have a better understanding of the process and of like the different types of open science. So with this, and Roman kind of like touch on it as well, of the mismatch between more like the older generation of scholars and the younger generations. What are other challenges that you see for scholars who want to do registered reports?
Should I kick it off? So I think a big challenge is that we are not, and there's one human resource management journal that says that way. We are not trained to do research that way. neither we as researchers, but also not the reviewers and editors. So we as researchers might run into struggles of not thinking of research questions that, for example, are interesting, whether you find a significant finding or not, right? We are trained to think in this counterintuitive way of these interaction, moderate mediation, or maybe even freeway interactions of these really, oh, you would never have guessed, but it's this way, right? And if you would think, oh, if I do this study, but I don't find anything significant, is that then interesting? And if the answer is not, then it's not ideal. So we need to think differently of how we approach research if we do registered reports. And the same, and then I kind of forwarding to Fabiola, because she can tell more stories about this probably, is you will run into reviewers and editors who don't know how to deal with that. They will either force you to collect crazy amounts of data, which is just unrealistic. They maybe still reject your paper even if you find non-significant results, which specifically registered report prohibits you from happening. So there are a lot of challenges, but there are also a lot of benefits in terms of producing higher quality work, in terms of a good way to publication in a supportive, collaborative manner with reviewers who can actually contribute knowledge before you made mistakes, rather than pointing out the mistakes you have already made post hoc.
And I also think there are many great questions where it could be so cool to think about registered reports. For example, leadership training or any kind of intervention, because everyone who has ever done an intervention knows how much work it is to get the people to do it, then the pre-survey, the post-survey, or other measures that you have. It's so much work. And if you do that for 1, 2, 3 years, and then nothing comes out of it, in the past, that was kind of like, yeah, really a big problem. If you would think about a registered report proposal, that's here a really great opportunity, that it doesn't force you to now find something somewhere in your data with some moderator, but that you can actually get the approval of your study design beforehand and then run the intervention study. But then again, also talking about the challenges that you asked for, I think one thing to maybe prepare for a little bit is, as an author of a registered report, that your emotional journey is a little bit different. Because normally you are super excited with your great research idea, you love it, you go ahead, like there's like 1 or 2 years where you have this, at least in your mind, idea that it's gonna be the next top publication and everyone will love it and it will be that amazing success story. And then only after you have all your data and you've written it up, then maybe you realize, okay, it's maybe not as changing the world as I thought it would be. But all the time beforehand, you are excited. For a registered report, this is different, because already much earlier in the process, you get the reviewers coming in and saying, hey, the way you are measuring this is actually maybe not the best idea. So it comes much earlier, and that's very different. I underestimated how different it would feel, because we also saw that a lot of the things were actually not true, like things that it's only for people who are later in their career or that they are riskier. All of that is actually not what we find. But we do see that people sometimes think it's a little bit more time or effort investment. And it's actually not really clear if this is really the case, because also for other articles, it's quite a lot of work, or if this judgment comes from this feeling that you just feel it's so much work because it just feels so differently than the journey that you normally go through.
Yes, I think thank you for bringing up like the emotional journey, and it's not just about the effort that we put in, it's also our mentality going through the new process that is different from our training. So can you two elaborate or like some interesting background stories in a review process that you encounter when writing this article?
So I think one thing that the reviewers brought up, which was really helpful for shaping the paper, is in the initial version, we had just asked authors who had already successfully gone through the registered report process. And I think the valid concern that the reviewers brought up was that, yeah, well, but maybe they are biased because they successfully went through it. So they might say everything is great about it. So we actually then in the revision process added the second sample with people who know what a registered report is, but who hadn't published one yet, and also with editors and reviewers. And it actually, at least for me, I can say it surprised me a little bit that the picture was pretty similar that emerged in terms of what people think is actually true about registered report and what is a myth. So that was first of all surprising. And the second thing that also surprised me was we were really concerned about getting editors and reviewers of registered report to fill in the survey because we thought there might not be that many. Who is going to do that? If we end up with 10 people, that's already great. And we actually got much more responses to the survey than we would initially have thought. So 59 people actually answered the survey who were editors or reviewers. And I think that's very very optimistic perspective for the field to see that there are already so many people who know what it is and who might be at least willing to shape the field.
That's a
How
great
about you,
point.
Roman? What was maybe
I
surprising
think
for you?
for me, what's surprising is right, you see a lot of these best practice pieces, right? I mean, Hermann Aquinas has written, for example, many of them, and some of them, what you see there, based on the expertise, on the review of the paper, and we thought, we'll be advancing this by, going one step further, not, providing our reading of the literature, but like providing some data with that by asking the reviewers. And I think it's interesting that, we thought we were one step above, but we are like kind of, so to say, we are climbing the first of, so to say, maybe 4 floors, right? So we added the additional data that Fabiola said, reviewers, editors, which I think is the biggest addition for us. And then the lay audience as a big group of I think nearly 180 people that we added as well. And what I think was also really pushing us was to asking, okay, you're making all these claims, people have subjective ratings. Is there any hard data, beyond subjective perceptions? And we thought, I think our reaction was a bit, this is going to be tough. But actually, I think this was a really interesting journey and worth the effort that we got objective data. What is with citations? What is with time to publish? What is the career stage of authors who engage in registered reports to have actual outcomes of saying, yes, all these 3 groups say it is that way, but is it actual that way? And I think this combination maybe of combining subjective ratings with objective data is something I'll try to do in other research now as well.
Yes, I think it's very fruitful to get the perspective from different groups that have engaged in different process of the register reports process. And it's interesting of how you can also combining the subjective perspective and the objective measure of is it what is actually happening, and also seeing the similarity, which is I was surprised of that. Of it seems like although people are thinking that it will be different from like each group, but it's actually similar, the picture of the register report process. So with that, what advice you have for scholars who is interested in writing register reports and also like writing research about this process, similar to you?
Probably straightforward. Go to table 2 of our paper, which summarizes the best practices. I guess that's probably the most straightforward thing to say. Our paper is really offering guidelines. So it's not supposed to just be an academic exercise of asking people about their perceptions of registered report, but the intention is if you read it, you have concrete ideas on where to start. That's maybe the first thing. And the second thing, if I would want to highlight one aspect for me, it would be don't just think about experiments. Registered reports can be much more.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at our advice. We've also engaged some other work on open science where we provide maybe additional advice depending on what kind of papers, like qualitative or computational. But our tables also in the supplements give a lot of additional ideas of what people should do. for me, if I would, and one thing I've mentioned it now several times, thinking in terms of a different research question, right? And meaning approach your research saying, okay, if we find that group A is better, is that interesting? If we find that group B is interesting, is that better? If we find that in both groups there are no difference, is that also interesting? And coming up with such research questions, that would be a big recommendation for researchers to switch a bit from these counterintuitive, sexy findings that but only if you find them more interesting. And if we talk about what should people consider who are interested in writing papers about registered reports, I think what I want to encourage, there's still so much to understand. Do registered reports differ for different type of registered reports, right? Registered report experiments, registered report survey studies, registered report field, qualitative, and all of that. I know Leadership Quarterly, where Fabiola is engaged, is now trying a new format where you look at registered reports happening during the review process, right? You submit a regular paper, but the next data collection is a registered report. How will that affect the quality of the paper, its outcomes, and so forth? So I think we only set a starting point, and I think the final say of everything that registered reports can or cannot do is not, the final word hasn't been said. I think we provide very solid evidence that a lot of what people think is not true. But in which area, what are the exact benefits and when? I think there's still more to be done, and we're excited to see that.
Yes, and thank you, Roman, for touching on kind of like the future directions of how, when other scholars are interested in writing papers about registered reports, what they can consider. And during your process of writing this paper, where do you see that the process of writing registered report can be improved? Can you elaborate or share with us some of that perspectives?
You're saying, sorry, how the process of writing registered reports improve in terms of like what are best practices of how to write a registered report, you mean?
I think it's more of like how the process of like the reviewer, the process of submitting and having it evaluated. Do you see if this process, where do you see that this process can be improved further, doing, talking to people who actually have written the register report, and also the reviewers and editors that involved in this process?
So some journals, I think, for example, the Journal of Business and Psychology really offer guidelines for reviewers on what they should look for when evaluating a registered report. And I think this is super helpful to, first of all, give reviewers concrete recommendations. What should they look for, and clarify their role? And second, that is sometimes a little bit an issue with how the journal systems are like technically organized, but it's not always clear for reviewers that something is a registered report submission. And that's a very easy to fix technical thing that is just important for the editor or for the person handling the review assignment process, that they simply make it clear to people, this is going to be a registered report that you are reviewing. It sounds straightforward, but that often is not happening, and it would be an easy thing to fix.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe I would add, as kind of transitioning journals and reviewers and editors in, I would simply say try it. During the time that Fabiola and I've been doing work, for example, two FD50 top journals, one in the IS field, MIS Quarterly, and one in operations, Journal of Operations Management, have started special issues trying out this format and making very interesting and mostly positive experiences. So as a journal, try it out, learn, how does your field and your specific subgroup deal with that? And there people can learn. I agree that reviewers need to be trained, editors need to be trained, what that means, what that entails. Maybe another set that I've been running to recently is, as both a reviewer and an author, anonymity. You provide a lot of materials additional, right? So basically you have to lay out all your study everything you plan beforehand. I've reviewed several registered reports where, while looking for the materials, it became clear who the authors were without me looking for it. So their authors need to be aware of that, but journals also need to provide specific help and guidelines of how to ensure that materials are still anonymous. If we want, what I personally would say we do want, keep the double-blind peer review. Second issue to smoothen the process is what I would say is, yeah, give guidelines. And we've provided links to specific guidelines, specific journals. Read our paper for general guidelines that are really helpful. And then also go to the journal, talk to the editors. Many of them are really willing to engage in a conversation with you. Is that a paper that's, you know, makes sense to submit as a registered report or not?
Yes, and I think those are very helpful insights to kind of see where the state of registered reports and how it can be improved. So do you two have any other thoughts that you want to share with the audience that we have not really covered today?
Maybe one thing to consider.
So maybe what I would add is just
sorry, go ahead, Roman.
I think we just misaligned a bit on time in terms. I think I'm delayed a bit. Go ahead. Sorry, Fabiola.
I wanted to say, if you are like teaching any kind of methods course or something related in a PhD program, it probably just makes sense to make people aware of that early on in their PhD journey, because then they could consider whether this is a suitable format that they would like to try, maybe at least for one of their projects in their PhD, which relates to Roman's recommendation of simply give it a trial.
Yeah, maybe to add to that is, I think when I give these presentations, people often perceive me as pointing at black and white, that you either, you know, if you're good and you're good researchers, you have to do registered reports, or you're a bad, lying, questionable research practice engaging researcher. And I don't think it's that black and white. I think registered reports are a very, very useful tool who produce quality research. So just try it out. You know, maybe say one of my next 5 projects will be a registered report, or one of my next 3. I'm convinced that you will then try out more once you've tried it. But just, you know, as a PhD advisor, as a researcher, as a university, you know, allow the researchers to try it out and you know, make a target and see, okay, this is the journal. I will try to write registered report. And what does that entail? Go to our paper, read, you know, what it does entail and what it doesn't entail. And then I think you will hopefully realize that registered report is part of the future of how we will conduct management and applied psychology research.
Yes, thank you both. And I think that's tied perfectly into one of the challenge that registered reports process might face is the training, and how we can integrate this into earlier training for the young scholar, but also have the more senior scholars who are our faculty, our advisors in the field, also try this process along with us and bring registered reports to become more familiar to scholars. So thank you both for your time today, sharing with us your paper, and also for your article on best practices on how to write registered reports and bring this closer to the scholars, and also provide the very clear set of guidelines that scholar and young scholar like me, or who are not familiar with the process, can start and be, I guess, for me at least, less intimidated by the process. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for the invite and the great conversation.